Imagine every day at home, your family brutally fighting with each other over betrayal, money, and irresponsibility. Until one day that argument takes a turn I never imagined before. Good morning, my dear viewers from across this beautiful United States. My name is Jandira Christine Meadows, but folks here in Kentucky know me as Grandma Jandy from the tobacco shop. I decided to tell my story today because there are certain things we keep inside for so long that they end up turning to stone in our chest. And that stone is almost suffocating me from how much it's grown. It's not easy to talk about certain things, but maybe it'll help someone going through what I went through. Maybe give strength to those who need to escape a situation that seems hopeless. I was born in 1947 in a simple little house in the hills of Elizabethtown, near what they now call the Historic District. Our house was small, but it had a big backyard with apple, pear, and cherry trees. My father, Junior, worked as a supervisor for the old railroad. He always wore that dark cap, with an air of importance that made me feel proud when I was little. My mother, Dorothy, did sewing for others, mainly party dresses and communion outfits. Until I was 10 years old, life seemed normal. At least what I thought was normal. Children have that gift, you know, of thinking their world is just like everyone else's. I only realized later that our house was different from others, a place that changed temperature depending on who was inside it. When my paternal grandparents, Grandpa Quinn and Grandma Gertrude, came to visit us, it was like sunshine came through the cracks in the windows, even on rainy days. The whole house would light up. Grandpa Quinn with his stories from the farm, imitating animals and making me laugh until my belly hurt. Grandma Gertrude with her cornbread that melted in your mouth and that way she had of stroking my hair while humming old songs. "Jandira, my little granddaughter," Grandma Gertrude always said, "you're blessed. You have eyes that shine like the stars in the July sky." And I believed her. When they were home, I truly was blessed. But when my grandparents left, when they left, it was like they took all the light with them. The house would darken, the air would get heavy. It was so visible to me that I'd ask my mother if the power had gone out. But it wasn't the streetlights that were missing. It was another kind of light. The fights always started the same way. My mother coming home late from work, smelling of cigarettes and alcohol. She'd say she'd been at some client's house trying on dresses, adjusting hems, that kind of thing. My father, sitting in the living room chair, arms crossed, waiting with that face I knew all too well. "Where were you, Dorothy?" he'd ask, his voice low but sharp as a knife. "Working, man. You think this roof pays for itself?" She'd respond, already defensive, throwing her purse on the table hard. And from there they'd go to shouting, him accusing her of being with other men, her saying he wasn't exactly a saint either. The whole town talked about his trips, about the girls at the train station ticket office, always smiling too much when he walked by. I'd stay in my room, hands over my ears, but it didn't help much. Our house had thin walls, the kind that seemed made of paper. I heard everything. The accusations, the curse words, sometimes the sound of things breaking. The next morning, there was always some plate or glass missing from the kitchen, and my mother would show up in long sleeves even in the heat. If any acquaintance came asking about the noise, my father would say it was the strong wind knocking things over. My mother would smile and confirm, a smile that never reached her eyes. In this life of lies and screaming, my grandparents were the only safe harbor. When they came, my parents would pretend to be the perfect couple. My father affectionate, my mother attentive. I didn't understand how they could fake it so well, but I was grateful for those days of peace, even if it was all a big act. Grandma Gertrude seemed to sense something wasn't right. Sometimes she'd take my face in her wrinkled hands and ask, looking deep into my eyes, "Is everything really okay, my flower?" I always said yes. I was afraid that if I told the truth, they'd never come back, and I'd lose those precious moments of real joy. Folks, I'm getting emotional telling this. If you're enjoying my story, leave your like down below and comment what city you're watching from and your name or nickname. This old lady here gets curious to know who's really paying attention to me. And don't forget to subscribe, okay? That way you won't miss any touching stories here. But getting back, my grandfather Quinn was a wise man, one of those who seems to read your soul just by looking. Once, when I was about 8 years old, he found me crying hidden behind the cherry tree. It had been after a bad fight between my parents the night before. I was tired, with dark circles under my eyes, and my child's heart couldn't take all that screaming anymore. He sat beside me, didn't say anything for a while, just stayed there, watching the ants carrying leaves on the ground. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Jandira, some people are like oil and water. They don't mix, no matter how much you shake the jar. It's not the oil's fault or the water's. It's just their nature." At the time, I didn't really understand what he meant. Today, I know he was trying to explain in his way that the problem wasn't with me, that I couldn't fix my parents, no matter how much I wanted to. My grandfather also taught me to feel people's energy. He said everyone has their own light, their own vibration. Pay attention to your chest when someone comes near you, he explained. If it tightens, if it gets hard to breathe, that's a sign to stay away. If it expands, if you feel like smiling for no reason, that's good people. That's how I started noticing how the energy changed when my grandparents were home. How the air got lighter, how colors seemed more vivid. It was their vibration, the light they carried. And I also noticed how everything darkened when they left, and my parents went back to being who they really were. At school, I was a quiet girl. I didn't bring friends home to play, afraid they'd arrive in the middle of a fight. I'd make up excuses, say our house was being renovated, that my mother was allergic to visitors, anything to keep people away from our family secret. The teachers thought I was shy. Little did they know I was always alert, always tense, always ready for the next disaster. A child of fighting parents learns early to read the climate, to predict storms, becomes a little meteorologist of adult moods. I remember once, I must have been about 9, I won an essay contest at school. The theme was my family, and I made up a beautiful story about how we spent Sundays together at the park, how my father taught me to fly kites, and my mother made picnics with cornbread. Pure imagination. Our real Sundays were heavy silence, my father reading the newspaper and grumbling, my mother smoking by the window, staring at nothing. The teacher was so enchanted with my essay that she wanted to meet this wonderful family. I panicked. I spent days rehearsing how to tell my parents they needed to pretend to be that family I had invented, but I ended up getting really sick with a high fever on the day scheduled for the visit. I think it was fear that made me sick. The teacher never brought up the subject again, and I silently thanked her for that. When I turned 10, I thought life would get better. It was an important number, double digits. I thought that somehow, magically, this would change everything. It didn't change. Actually, that's when things really started falling apart. First, my grandfather Quinn had a sudden heart attack while working on the farm. It was on a Saturday morning. I remember we were having breakfast when the phone rang. It was rare for the phone to ring at our house. We only had one neighbor who had a phone, and he'd come call when the call was for us. My father answered, and his face changed immediately. He went pale, hands shaking. He didn't even need to speak. I felt it in my chest, that sharp pain, like someone had torn a piece out of me. I knew right away it was my grandfather. Grandma Gertrude couldn't handle the loss. They had been married for more than 50 years. One of those couples you look at and think, that's how it should be. She withered quickly, lost the will to eat, to talk, to live. Less than 3 months after my grandfather's funeral, she was gone too. They said it was a heart attack, like him, but I know it was really a broken heart. With my grandparents' death, things at home got even worse. It was like they were the only glue still holding my parents together, even if just to keep up appearances. Without them, there was no more reason to pretend. The fights became more frequent, more violent. There were no more days of truce, just moments of tense silence between one explosion and another. I couldn't sleep properly anymore, lived startled, waiting for the next scream, the next sound of breaking glass. Until one day, my father came into my room in the morning before I left for school. He seemed different, almost calm, with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. "Jandira," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I'm going to buy a beautiful gift for your mother today, something special. Maybe things will get better, you know?" I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he had finally understood that they needed to change, that they couldn't keep living like that. I went to school with a lighter heart that day. When I came back, my mother was alone at home, smoking in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey beside her. I asked about my father. "He went to buy me a gift, did he?" She laughed, a bitter laugh that made my spine shiver. "The gift he gave me was to disappear. He took his things and left. Must be far away by now." I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was just another fight, that he'd come back at night like he always did. But days went by, and my father didn't return. 1 week, 2, a month. Gradually, I understood that he had really left, that he had abandoned us. And that's how, at 10 years old, I found myself alone with my mother. A woman I barely knew, actually. A stranger who shared the same roof with me, but who seemed to live in another world. A world of bitterness and anger that I didn't understand. Without my grandparents to protect me, without my father to at least divide her attention, I was completely at the mercy of Dorothy. And I would soon discover that the worst was yet to come. Because a desperate woman, abandoned and broke, can do things no one imagines. Not even her own daughter. When I think about everything I went through, sometimes I wonder how I managed to survive. I think we have a strength inside that we only discover when we have no choice left. But let's continue from where I left off. It was shortly after my 10th birthday that the world really started crumbling. I remember like it was yesterday. It was a March afternoon, clear sky, that typical heat of Elizabethtown. I was playing with a rag doll that my Grandma Gertrude had made for me, one of her last gifts before she passed. My grandparents' death was the first hard blow I received in life. Grandpa Quinn left first, on an ordinary day, working in his garden. A heart attack, they said. He fell among the cornstalks he cared for so much. Grandma Gertrude tried to go on without him, but it was like they had torn half of her away. In less than 3 months, she was gone too. The neighbors said it was sickness from missing someone. But the doctor said it was her heart too. On that March day, while I was playing, I heard my father coming home earlier from work. This was rare. He normally only came back after nightfall. He came in hurried, didn't even pay attention when I ran to hug him like I always did. He went straight to the bedroom and started throwing clothes in an old suitcase. "Dad, what's happening?" I asked, standing in the doorway, holding my doll tight. He looked at me like he had forgotten I existed. Then, he sighed deeply and sat on the edge of the bed. I'll never forget that expression. A mixture of guilt and relief, like someone who finally made a decision they'd been putting off for a long time. "Jandira," he said, his voice lower than normal. "I'm going to buy a beautiful gift for your mother, something special. We need a change." I believed him. Children have that innocence, you know? They believe the words, not the eyes. And his eyes were saying something completely different. "Can I come with you?" I asked, already imagining what kind of gift it would be. "No, daughter. It's a surprise. You stay and help your mother prepare a nice dinner for when I come back." He closed the suitcase, gave me a kiss on the forehead, longer than usual, and left. That was the last kiss, the last time I saw my father. Junior Meadows disappeared from our lives that day, without looking back. My mother arrived hours later, smelling of alcohol as always. She noticed something was different as soon as she walked in. Maybe the silence of the house, maybe my face like someone who had cried all afternoon, waiting for a father who wasn't coming back. "Where's your father?" she asked, throwing her purse on the couch. "He went to buy you a gift," I replied, still with a glimmer of hope. "He said it was a surprise." She let out a dry laugh, one of those that has nothing funny about it. She went to the bedroom and opened the closet. She stood looking at the empty space where his clothes should have been. Then, without saying anything, she grabbed a bottle she hid under the bed and drank straight from it. "The gift he gave me was to disappear." "That's right," she finally said. Her voice choked. "He took his things and left. Must be far away by now." I didn't believe it at first. I spent days waiting, looking out the window, running to the door every time I heard footsteps on the street. 1 week, 2, a month. Gradually, the truth settled like dust. My father had abandoned us. Later, I found out he hadn't gone that far. A neighbor told me she saw him in Louisville, a city less than 60 miles from Elizabethtown, living with another woman much younger than my mother. He had even gotten another job at the train station there. He simply restarted his life, as if my mother and I had never existed. That abandonment changed everything. Without my father's salary, our financial situation, which wasn't good to begin with, became desperate. My mother worked as a seamstress, but spent most of what she earned on alcohol. Bills started piling up, notices of electricity and water shutoffs appeared under the door almost every week. The house, which was already a sad place before, became a real hell. My mother sank even deeper into drinking. She no longer hid it, drank in front of me, sometimes from the moment she woke up. The clients who brought clothes for her to sew started disappearing. Who would trust expensive fabrics to a woman with shaky hands and always red eyes? Life is like that, Jandira, she'd say when I cried from hunger. One misfortune after another. The sooner you learn that, the better. I started missing classes to try to help at home. I went door to door offering to wash clothes, sweep yards, anything to get some change. I was only 10 years old, but I already carried grown-up responsibilities. The teachers tried to intervene. Mrs. Eunice, who taught 3rd grade, even came to our house to talk to my mother. She said I was a smart girl, that I had a future in studies. My mother promised she'd send me to school the next day, but as soon as the teacher left, she told me to forget that conversation. Study for what? To be like your mother? Or like your father, who studied and isn't even good enough to stay with his family? We need money, not books. And so, gradually, school was left behind. I'd go once, twice a week at most. Classmates started treating me differently. The girls would whisper when I passed. Boys made jokes about my mother. Soon, it was easier not to go at all. I remember one day when I opened the refrigerator and there was only a wilted onion and half a bottle of bourbon. The kitchen cabinet had a package of flour with weevils. That was all we had in the house. My stomach ached from hunger, but there was nothing to eat. My mother was lying on the couch on one of those days when she couldn't even get up from so much drinking. That's when I had an idea. I took the last pretty dress I had, one that my Grandma Gertrude had made for me before she died, and went to the farmer's market. There was a lady who sold pastries there, Mrs. Genevieve. She always looked at me with pity when I passed by. I offered the dress in exchange for food. "My child, this dress is worth much more than some pastries," she said, her eyes full of compassion. "But I'm very hungry, Mrs. Genevieve, and there's nothing to eat at home." She didn't accept the dress. Instead, she gave me a bag with bread, a piece of cheese, and some fruit. She said I could help at her stand on Saturdays if I wanted to earn some change. It was my first real job. The situation at home kept getting worse. My mother started disappearing for days, coming back smelling not just of alcohol, but of men's cologne, too. I'd stay alone, taking care of the house as best I could, eating what I could buy with the little money I earned at the market or doing small jobs. My clothes didn't fit anymore, shoes were tight. I grew up wearing dresses that got shorter and shorter, mending holey socks, washing the same blouse several times a week, because it was the only one that still fit. It was around this time, when I was about 12, that my mother met Jeremy. He owned a fabric store in downtown Elizabethtown, a man in his 50s, pot-bellied, always in a well-pressed dress shirt and a gold watch on his wrist. I remember the first day I saw him. He had green eyes, cold as well water, that examined me from head to toe in a way that made me want to hide. "Your daughter is a pretty young lady, Dorothy," he said to my mother while looking at me. "She got your beauty." My mother smiled, in that way I rarely saw. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of someone who had just found a solution to a difficult problem. I realized later that, for her, I had stopped being just a mouth to feed and had become a resource. Jeremy started showing up at our house frequently. He brought gifts for my mother, bottles of better alcohol than the cheap bourbon she usually drank, fine fabrics, even a pair of new shoes once. For me, he brought candy and sometimes a dress that had leftover from the store. He always asked me to try them on in front of him, always insisted on seeing how it looked. My mother finally got a steady job at his store. I don't know exactly what she did there. She said she was a saleswoman, then that she organized inventory. The stories changed. I just know she came back later and later, smelling of quality alcohol and wearing new clothes. Our financial situation improved a little. At least now there was food in the refrigerator. The electricity wasn't cut off anymore. But there was a price for this apparent improvement. A price I didn't fully understand yet. One day, when I was 14, my mother called me to go with her to work. It was a Saturday. The store would be closed, but she said she needed to organize some things and that Jeremy had asked for me to come too. He said he needs a young assistant with small hands to organize the buttons, she explained. Something about the way she spoke made me uncomfortable. My grandfather taught me to trust the feeling in my chest, remember? And at that moment, my chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. But what could a 14-year-old girl, without a father, without school, dependent on her mother, do? I went. The store was big, occupying 2 floors of an old building downtown. The ground floor was where the fabrics, threads, buttons were. Everything organized on shelves up to the ceiling. The upper floor I had never seen. That's where Jeremy's office was, according to my mother. When we arrived, Jeremy was already there, even though it was very early. He opened the back door for us, that same smile that never reached his eyes. There were 2 other people with him. Men I had never seen before, one of them carrying a big camera, one of those professional ones. "Dorothy, you didn't tell me your daughter had become so developed," he commented, looking at me in a way that made my skin crawl with disgust. I had started developing breasts recently. My body was still a girl's, but he looked at me like I was a grown woman. My mother just smiled that strange smile again. "She's ready, Jeremy. We've already talked about this." It was at that moment I understood I wasn't there to organize any buttons. Something much worse was about to happen. Jeremy took me upstairs, along with the other men. My mother came behind. The office was big, with a dark wooden desk in the center, leather sofas in one corner, and a kind of improvised bed in another. "We're going to take some beautiful pictures of you, Jandira," said Jeremy, while the man with the camera adjusted some lights. "Your mother is going to help you get ready." I looked at my mother, confused, scared. She approached me, and, for the first time in a long time, I saw something like shame in her eyes. But it lasted only a second. "Daughter, today you're going to have to be very brave," she said quietly. "We're going to make good money from this. It'll be enough to pay all our debts, maybe even buy a better house." "Make money how?" I asked, my voice trembling. That's when she explained what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to take off my clothes. They wanted her to touch me. While they filmed, while Jeremy watched, my world collapsed at that instant. The person who should protect me was handing me over to be abused. My own mother, for money. "No!" I screamed, trying to run to the door. But one of the men held me. "We don't have time for this," said Jeremy, irritated. "Dorothy, control your daughter, or the deal is off." What happened in the following minutes is something I try to erase from memory to this day. My mother holding me, forcing me while I cried and begged. Jeremy saying what she should do to me, how to touch me, where. The camera flash recording everything. The shame, the disgust, the pain, the feeling of betrayal so deep I thought I would die right there. When it was all over, I stayed huddled in a corner, shaking, while my mother and Jeremy discussed payment. I heard numbers being mentioned, amounts that for us were a fortune. Money for which my mother had sold my dignity, my childhood, my trust. On the way home, she tried to comfort me, saying it had been just that once, that we'd never have to do that again, that with the money we could start a new life, that I should be strong, that women in our situation sometimes had to make sacrifices. Sacrifices, I screamed through tears. "Is that what you call what happened there? A sacrifice?" She didn't answer. She just kept walking, the wad of money secure in her purse, a satisfied smile on her lips. At that moment, I understood I was no longer a daughter. I was merchandise. When we got home, I locked myself in the bathroom and tried to scrub my skin until it bled, as if I could clean what had happened. I cried until I had no more tears. I thought about running away, about killing myself, about anything that would get me out of that nightmare. But then, looking at the small bathroom cabinet, I saw the bottle of lye that my mother used to unclog the drain. I remembered that my father kept other chemical products in a little room at the back of the house, leftovers from when he worked on the railroad and brought things home. It was there, at rock bottom, that I had an idea. A terrible, desperate idea, but one that seemed like my only way out. If it worked, I would escape that hell. If it didn't, well, anything would be better than living as merchandise in my own mother's hands. That night, while she celebrated our new fortune drinking until she passed out, I started planning my escape because I knew, deep in my heart, that it hadn't been just That once. It was just the beginning, and I needed to leave before it happened again. The plan was formed in my head, as clear as water. I just needed courage to execute it. And at that moment, courage was the only thing I had in abundance. In life, we learn that not all monsters look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the people who should protect us. It's hard to tell this part of my story, but I'll try. The wound still hurts, even after so many years. That night, after what happened at Jeremy's store, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt my mother's hands touching me, heard her voice telling me what I should do, saw the camera flash recording my humiliation. I stared at the cracked ceiling of my room until sunrise, thinking about what had happened and what could still happen if I stayed there. My mother slept all day. The drinking binge from the night before had been big, celebrating the money she got from selling her own daughter. I took advantage of her being unconscious to explore the little room at the back, where my father kept his things. The lock was rusty, but I managed to open it with a piece of wire. The musty smell inside was strong, mixed with the odor of chemicals. On the wooden shelves, I found several bottles and cans, many without labels. Some I recognized: kerosene, turpentine, paint. Others, I had no idea what they were. At the back, in a dark corner, I found what I was looking for: a jug of lye still half full. My father used it to clean the house drains when they got clogged. I remembered him saying it was too dangerous for me to get near. I took the jug carefully and hid it under my bed. My plan was taking shape, but I needed money to run away. I waited for my mother to wake up, pretending everything was fine, that I had gotten over what happened. She seemed relieved by my attitude, maybe thinking it would be easier to convince me to do it again. "Look what I bought for you," she said, handing me a new dress. It was pretty, a light blue I always liked. "We're going shopping today. You can choose whatever you want." I accepted the dress, swallowing the disgust I felt. I needed to seem normal, gain her trust again. We went downtown, bought clothes, shoes, even cheap perfume. Things we never had the means to buy before, all paid for with money from my shame. While she was distracted in a fabric store, I managed to take some bills from her purse. Not much, just enough for a bus ticket and a few days of food. I hid the money in my sock, praying she wouldn't notice. We came home with bags full, but my heart was empty. That night, she received a phone call. From the tone of the conversation, I realized it was Jeremy. My blood froze when I heard her say, "Of course, no problem. We'll bring her tomorrow." When she hung up, she came to me with that same fake smile. "Jeremy really liked the photos, daughter. He wants to take some more tomorrow. He said he'll pay double this time." It was at that moment I knew. It had to be that night. There was no more time. "Okay, Mom," I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I think I understand that this is important for us." She seemed surprised by my acceptance, but satisfied. She hugged me, a hug that before would have meant comfort and now only caused me revulsion. "You're a good girl, Jandera. You'll see. Soon we'll have a much better life." I waited for her to take a bath before sleeping, as she always did. I heard the shower turn on and knew it was my chance. I got the lye jug from under the bed, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. The cap was tight, but I managed to open it. The strong smell made my eyes burn. Our house's bathroom was separated only by a yellowed plastic curtain. I could see my mother's silhouette through it, humming softly as she washed herself, probably thinking about the money she'd make the next day. I approached slowly, the heavy jug in my girl's arms. Each step seemed like an eternity. I thought about my grandparents, how horrified they'd be if they knew what had happened, what I was about to do. I thought about my father, who abandoned us and left me at the mercy of that woman I no longer recognized as a mother. I stopped at the bathroom entrance, the curtain swaying slightly with the shower steam. It was my last chance to give up, to find another way out. But what way out would exist for a 14-year-old girl without money, without education, with no one in the world to protect her? "Mom," I called, my voice surprisingly firm. "What is it, Jandira?" she replied, pulling the curtain aside just a little to look at me. Our eyes met for a second. I saw confusion in her look, then fear when she noticed the jug in my hands. Before she could say anything, I raised the container and threw the contents in her direction. The scream she let out will stay with me until the end of my days. The lie hit mainly her chest and arms, a little on her face. She slipped on the wet floor, falling inside the shower stall, writhing in pain while trying to get that corrosive substance off her skin. I didn't stay to see more. I dropped the jug and ran to the bedroom, where I already had a small bundle prepared with some clothes and the money I had managed to take. I also took her wallet from the dresser in the living room, where she had kept the rest of the money she earned from my humiliation. The screams continued, mixed with the noise of the shower. Part of me wanted to go back, help somehow, but the other part, the part that had been betrayed in the worst possible way, just wanted distance. I left through the front door without looking back, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. The streets were dark and empty at that hour of the night. I ran to the bus station, which was about a 20-minute walk from our house. Every shadow scared me. Every noise seemed to be someone coming after me, but I managed to get there breathless, with trembling legs from exhaustion and fear. Elizabethtown's bus station was small, just a few platforms and a waiting room with wooden benches. There were few buses at that hour, one to Louisville that was already leaving, another to Nashville that would only leave in the morning. I chose the one that was departing. It didn't matter where, as long as it was far from there. "One ticket to Louisville," I asked the sleepy man at the counter, trying to seem older than I was. Luckily, he barely looked at me, just took the money, and handed me the ticket. I got on the almost empty bus and sat in the back, huddling against the window. As the vehicle left the station, I felt a mix of relief and terror. I had just thrown lie on my own mother. I didn't know if she would survive, if she would have serious scars. I could be sought by the police, maybe even arrested, but at that moment, none of that mattered more than escaping. Escaping from those men, those cameras, those hands that should protect me, and instead handed me over to abuse. The trip to Louisville took about an hour and a half. I stayed awake the whole time, looking out the window at the darkness passing by, the occasional lights of some town or gas station. I thought about what I would do when I arrived in the city. I didn't know anyone there, had never left Elizabethtown before. The big city scared me as much as staying. I arrived at Louisville's bus station still in the early morning. The place was huge compared to Elizabethtown's small station, full of people even at that hour. Noisy, confusing. I felt completely lost. I sat on a bench and stayed watching the movement, trying to decide what to do. I had enough money for a few days in a cheap hotel, maybe a week if I saved a lot. After that, I'd need to find work, a place to stay. I ended up falling asleep right there, on the station bench, the bundle of clothes clutched to my chest. I woke up with a lady gently shaking me. "Girl, you can't sleep here. It's dangerous," she said, her voice kind despite the warning words. She was a black woman, middle-aged, dressed in a cleaning uniform. "Where's your family?" I couldn't answer. The tears I had held back all night finally came, in uncontrolled sobs that shook my whole body. The woman, who I later found out was named Zelda, sat beside me and waited patiently for me to calm down. "I don't have family," I managed to say finally, between sobs. "I ran away from home." She looked at me for a long moment, as if evaluating whether I was a problematic runaway or a victim. She must have decided on the second option, because she sighed deeply and said, "Come with me. I'll buy you coffee and you tell me this story properly." Zelda took me to the station snack bar, ordered coffee with milk and buttered bread for me. While I ate, realizing only then that I was starving, I told an edited version of my story. I said my mother drank a lot, that she had started hitting me, that I ran away because I was afraid. I didn't mention Jeremy, the photos, the lie. Some truths are too heavy to share with strangers. "How old are you?" she asked, observing me attentively. 16, I lied, trying to seem older. I was only 14, but I knew that being a minor, she could turn me over to some child services who would send me back to Elizabethtown. Zelda didn't seem very convinced, but didn't insist. "Do you have any relatives here in Louisville? Someone who can take you in?" I shook my head. "I don't know anyone here. I came because it was the bus that was leaving." She was silent for a moment, thoughtful. Then she said something that changed the course of my life. "Look, I can't take you to my house. I live in a small room with my 2 daughters. We barely fit there. But I know a place where you can stay for a few days until you decide what to do. It's a tobacco shop downtown. The owner, Mr. Adalbert, sometimes lets people stay in the back room in exchange for help at the counter. It's not much, but it's better than the street. I accepted the offer immediately. Anything would be better than going back to Elizabethtown or wandering the streets of a city I didn't know. Zelda finished her shift at noon and took me to the tobacco shop. It was a small place on a narrow downtown street with a dusty window displaying pipes, cigarettes, and tobaccos of various brands. The strong smell of tobacco invaded your nostrils as soon as you opened the door. Mr. Adalbert was behind the counter, a man of about 50, thin, with a graying mustache and reading glasses on the tip of his nose. He looked at me suspiciously when Zelda explained the situation. "I'm not an orphanage, Zelda," he grumbled, examining me over his glasses. "And she's too young. She'll bring me problems." "She needs help, Adalbert," Zelda insisted. "Just for a few days, until she finds another place. She can work to pay for lodging." He sighed, seeming resigned. 3 days, not one more, and she'll have to work hard. That's how my life at Adalbert's tobacco shop began. The back room was tiny, with just a narrow bed, an old dresser, and a small bathroom. But it was clean, and more importantly, it was safe. Far from Elizabethtown, far from my mother, far from Jeremy and his friends with cameras. The 3 days turned into a week, then a month, then 6 months. Mr. Adalbert, despite his grumpy manner, was a decent man. He taught me the work at the tobacco shop, serving customers, organizing merchandise, placing orders with suppliers. He paid little, but enough for my basic needs, and I had the little room to live in. During those first months, I lived in constant fear. Every time the tobacco shop door opened, my heart would race, thinking it could be the police looking for me for what I had done to my mother, or worse, Jeremy having found me to finish what he started that terrible day at his store. It took a long time for that fear to diminish. Through Zelda, who continued visiting me occasionally, I got fake documents that gave me 16 years instead of 14. It wasn't much, but at least it allowed me to work legally at the tobacco shop. Mr. Adalbert knew there was something wrong with my story, but never asked too many questions. I think he himself had his secrets, his scars from the past. Life in Louisville was difficult for a girl from the countryside. The big city scared me with its constant noise, its crowds, its indifference. In the first months, I barely left the tobacco shop except to buy food or make deliveries for Mr. Adalbert. Gradually, I created courage to explore the nearby streets, get to know the neighborhood, get used to my new home. At night, alone in the back room, nightmares came. I dreamed of my mother writhing under the shower, her skin melting from the lye. I dreamed of Jeremy and his friends chasing me through the city, cameras in hand. I'd wake up screaming, sweaty, only to remember where I was and cry softly until dawn. I never heard from my mother again. I didn't know if she had survived, if she had serious scars, if she was looking for me, or if she had forgotten me. Part of me wanted to know. Another part preferred to keep that door to the past tightly closed. When I completed a year working at the tobacco shop, Mr. Adalbert called me for a serious conversation. I thought he was finally going to send me away, that it was time to look for another place. Instead, he offered me partnership in the business. "You work well, Jandira," he said, without beating around the bush. "You know the tobacco shop like the back of your hand. Customers like you. I'm getting old and have no children. If you want to stay, we can make a partnership. You keep working, learning the business, and one day, when I'm no longer here, the tobacco shop will be yours." I was speechless. After everything I had been through, someone was offering me a future, a chance to build something solid. I accepted immediately, with tears in my eyes that he pretended not to see. Time went by, and the tobacco shop truly became my home. Mr. Adalbert was like the father I never had, demanding but fair, strict but protective. He taught me not just about the business, but about life. How to save money, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to defend yourself in a world that's rarely kind to women alone. At 17, 19 in my fake documents, I met Josiah. He was a customer at the tobacco shop, always came to buy pipe tobacco. A quiet man, a few words, about 15 years older than me. He worked as an accountant in a nearby office and always stopped to chat a little before going back to work. At first, I barely noticed his intentions. I was so focused on surviving, on forgetting the past, that I didn't notice the looks, the small gifts, the increasingly frequent visits. It was Mr. Adalbert who alerted me. "That accountant is interested in you, girl," he said one day, after Josiah left the store. "He's an honest man. You should give him a chance." I was surprised. I didn't think of myself as someone who could awaken romantic interest. After everything I had lived through, the idea of intimacy with a man caused me more fear than desire. But Josiah was different from all the men I had known. Kind, patient, respectful. We started meeting after work, just to walk in the square, have coffee, talk. He never tried to touch me inappropriately, never pressured me for anything. Gradually, I lowered my guard, allowing him to get a little closer. It took me almost a year to tell part of my story to him. Not everything. I never told anyone about Jeremy, the photos, what my mother forced me to do. But I told him about her alcoholism, about my father's abandonment, about how I ran away from home as a teenager. Josiah listened to everything in silence, holding my hands in his. When I finished, expecting to see pity or rejection in his eyes, I saw only understanding and something else. Something I took time to recognize as love. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Jandira," he said simply. And at that moment, I felt that maybe, just maybe, there could be a future for me beyond daily survival. A future with joy, with connection, with something like a family. We got married when I was 19 for real, 21 in the documents. It was a simple ceremony, just Mr. Adalbert and some friends from the tobacco shop as guests. Josiah never questioned the discrepancy in my documents, never insisted on meeting my family or going back to Elizabethtown. He accepted my nebulous past as part of who I was, without demanding explanations I wasn't ready to give. Our life together was peaceful, within what's possible for someone carrying as many ghosts as I was. Josiah was a good man, hard-working, who treated me with respect and affection. I continued working at the tobacco shop, now no longer as an employee, but as Mr. Adalbert's actual partner. In 1970, Mr. Adalbert passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left the tobacco shop entirely to me, as he had promised years before. It was a painful loss. He had become the father figure I never really had. But his legacy remained, not just in the business he entrusted to me, but in the life lessons he taught me. With Josiah, I built a stable, safe life. We never had children. Something inside me seemed broken after everything I lived through, and doctors never found a physical explanation for my infertility. Maybe it was better that way. The cycle of abuse that began with my mother would end with me. We moved to a small but comfortable house near the tobacco shop. We made some friends, created a routine, aged together. Josiah never knew everything. Some wounds are too deep to be exposed, even to those we love. But he knew enough to understand my moments of inexplicable sadness, my occasional nightmares, my fear of returning to Elizabethtown. In 1985, almost 20 years after my escape, I received a letter addressed to the tobacco shop. It had no return address, just the postal stamp from Elizabethtown. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside, there was only a newspaper clipping yellowed by time. It was an obituary from 1966. Yesterday passed away at her residence Dorothy Alves Meadows, 42 years old, victim of health complications. She leaves a daughter, Jandira, whereabouts unknown. Health complications. A polite way of saying she never fully recovered from the lie attack. My mother had died just 1 year after my escape. I never found out who sent me that clipping, how they found me after so long. Maybe some old neighbor, maybe even my father, if he was still alive. I cried that day. I don't quite know why. Not for the woman who betrayed me in the worst possible way, but maybe for the mother she could have been, for the daughter I could have been if circumstances had been different. I cried for the waste of lives, for the pain we perpetuate on each other, for cycles we rarely manage to break. Josiah found me with the clipping in my hands, red eyes. He didn't ask anything, just hugged me in silence. That's what I loved most about him, his ability to offer comfort without demanding explanations. Life went on. The tobacco shop prospered under my care, despite the economic difficulties the country faced in the following decades. Josiah retired from the accounting office, but continued helping me with the business finances. We aged together, building a life that, if not exactly happy in the traditional sense, was at least peaceful, respectful, safe. He passed away in 2010, victim of a cancer that consumed his body gently, without much pain. I was left alone, but not helpless. The tobacco shop was still my anchor, my purpose. Old customers, many of them already elderly like me, came not just to buy, but to talk, exchange stories, keep company. And so I reached 76 years old, still behind the same counter where I found refuge when I was just a scared girl running from horrors no child should know. Life wasn't easy, but I survived. More than that, I found moments of peace, dignity, purpose. I never went back to Elizabethtown. I never tried to find out what happened to Jeremy, if he was arrested, if he continued abusing other girls. I never tried to find my father to ask why he abandoned us when we needed him most. Some doors are better kept closed. Today, when I look in the mirror and see this lady with white hair, tired but still alert eyes, I wonder what that 14-year-old girl would think if she could see me now. I think she'd be proud of having survived, of having found a path through the darkness. I think she'd understand that sometimes surviving is already a form of victory. There are certain decisions in life we make in the blink of an eye, but that change everything forever. Throwing that lie on my mother was one of those decisions. I'm not proud of what I did. I never wanted to hurt anyone, not even her after everything. But at that moment, at 14 years old with no way out, it was the only path I could see. Arriving in Louisville was a shock. I went from a small countryside town straight to a big city without knowing anyone, without having any idea how to survive. If it weren't for Zelda, that big-hearted cleaning lady who found me sleeping at the bus station, only God knows what would have happened to me. The first days at Mr. Adalbert's tobacco shop were pure fear. Every noise on the street made me tremble, thinking it was the police coming to get me for what I had done to my mother. Or worse, that it was Jeremy who had found me to finish what he started that terrible day at his store. I could barely sleep. When I managed to, I had horrible nightmares. I saw my mother with her face melted by the lie chasing me, screaming that I was ungrateful, that I had destroyed her life. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, biting the pillow to not scream and wake Mr. Adalbert. The back room of the tobacco shop was small, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a tiny bathroom. The walls were thin. You could hear the street noise and people passing by. But after everything I had lived through, that cubicle was paradise. It was mine. It was safe. Mr. Adalbert wasn't a man of many words. In the first days, he watched me suspiciously while I tried to learn the work at the tobacco shop, serving customers, organizing shelves, preparing tobacco packages. My hands shook so much that I'd drop things, mix up products, make mistakes with change. "Girl," he told me on the third day, his voice deep but not harsh. "If you're going to stay, you need to calm down. Nobody here is going to hurt you." Those simple words were like a balm. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, I felt they were true. Mr. Adalbert didn't want anything from me beyond the honest work we had agreed on. There were no second intentions in his eyes, no malicious smile, no hand that accidentally touched my body. Gradually, I learned the trade. The tobacco shop mainly sold pipe tobacco and roll-your-own cigarettes, plus accessories like lighters, cigarette holders, and imported pipes. It was frequented by a loyal clientele, mostly older men, who came not just to buy, but to talk, exchange stories, escape loneliness a little. Mr. Adalbert taught me to recognize different types of tobacco by smell and texture. He taught me to wrap packages with that brown paper and twine, making a perfect bow at the end. He taught me to handle money, to do the cash register accounts, to negotiate with suppliers. More importantly, he taught me to trust again, not all at once, but gradually, like someone testing thin ice before stepping hard. "Everyone has a sad story to tell, Jandira," he told me one night as we closed the store. "What matters isn't what happened to you, but what you're going to do from here on." I never told him everything. Some things are too heavy to share, even with those who shelter us. But I told him enough, that I had run away from home because my mother drank a lot, that my father had abandoned us, that I no longer had family. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded like someone who understands more than was said. After a few months, I started receiving a small salary besides lodging. It wasn't much, but for someone who had never had her own money, it was a fortune. I saved every cent under the mattress, saving for the day I might need to run again. Because even starting to feel safe, fear never completely left me. With Zelda's help, who continued visiting me from time to time, I got fake documents that gave me 16 years instead of 14. It wasn't much, but it made a difference. Mr. Adalbert pretended to believe it, even though his eyes said he knew the lie. 16 years old, is it? And I'm the King of England, he grumbled, but he put the documents in the desk drawer and didn't touch the subject again. Time went by, and gradually I created courage to explore beyond the tobacco shop walls. At first, just the street in front, then the block, then the whole neighborhood. Louisville was a completely different world from Elizabethtown. Big, noisy, full of hurried people who didn't even notice a skinny girl walking alone. There was a square near the tobacco shop where I liked to sit on Sundays, the only day Mr. Adalbert closed the store. I'd stay watching families strolling, children running, dating couples. I felt a mixture of envy and relief. Envy of that normalcy I never had. Relief for being away from the hell my previous life had been. It was in that square that, about a year after my arrival, I had an encounter that almost made me run away again. I was sitting on a bench, eating a cheese bread I had bought at a nearby bakery, when I saw a man watching me from afar. Something about him reminded me of Jeremy. Maybe the way he looked, maybe just the terror of my own memories. I jumped up and ran, dropping the rest of the cheese bread. I ran without looking back, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. I locked myself in the tobacco shop's little room and spent the rest of the day shaking, waiting for the door to be broken down at any moment, for cruel hands to drag me back to Elizabethtown, back to hell. But nothing happened. Nobody came. The next day, when I told Mr. Adalbert I had seen someone watching me, he just took the old revolver he kept under the counter and put it more in view. "Nobody's going to take you from here against your will, girl," he said, with a certainty that made me cry with relief. It was around this time that I really started understanding the tobacco shop business. Mr. Adalbert was aging, his eyes couldn't see as well, his hands sometimes shook when counting money. I started taking on more responsibilities, placing orders with suppliers, negotiating prices, organizing the accounting books. I discovered I had a talent for business. Customers liked me, suppliers respected my firmness in negotiations, and Mr. Adalbert seemed increasingly satisfied with my work. The tobacco shop, which before barely survived, started prospering under my care. "You have a good eye for business, Jandira," Mr. Adalbert commented one day, while I showed him how I had reorganized the inventory to better use space. Better than mine, to tell the truth. That simple compliment meant more to me than anything. It was recognition. It was appreciation. Things I had never received before. Time continued passing. 1 year became 2, 2 became 3. My fear of being discovered, of being taken back, gradually diminished. I started building a life in Louisville, creating roots, even if fragile. With the money I saved, I bought new clothes, books. I always liked reading, even having little formal education. Even a small radio to listen to music in the back room. I started going to the movies occasionally, sitting alone in the last row, lost in the screen stories that made me forget my own for a few hours. I was 17, 19 in the fake documents, when Mr. Adalbert called me for a serious conversation. It was late afternoon, the tobacco shop already closed, just the two of us sitting on the stools behind the counter with 2 cups of strong coffee. "Jandira," he began, his voice hoarser than normal. "I'm not a man who beats around the bush, you know me. I'm getting old. My eyes don't see right anymore. My joints hurt in the cold. The doctor said my heart isn't the best." I felt a tightness in my chest. The idea of losing Mr. Adalbert, the only person who had been genuinely good to me since my grandparents, was unbearable. "I don't have family," he continued. "Never married, don't have children. It was always just me in this tobacco shop. But now I have you." He paused, took a sip of coffee, looked me in the eyes. I want you to keep the tobacco shop when I'm no longer here. I was speechless. Never, not even in my most optimistic dreams, had I imagined something like this. Someone trusting me to this extent, giving me a real chance at a future. But, Mr. Adalbert, it's your business, your whole life. I stammered, not knowing how to respond. And what am I going to do with it when I die? Take it to the coffin, he replied, with that dry humor he always had. You took care of this place like it was yours. You turned a dying business into a success. You deserve to keep it. Tears I couldn't contain rolled down my face. They weren't just tears of gratitude, but of something deeper. The feeling of finally belonging somewhere, of having a future beyond daily survival. Thank you, was all I could say. My voice choked. Mr. Adalbert just nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. He finished his coffee, got up and said, as if we were just closing another normal workday, "Tomorrow we'll go to the notary to sort out the paperwork." And so, from one day to the next, I became the future owner of Adalbert's tobacco shop. We continued working together, but now he taught me more about administration, about the business secrets only the owner knows. I started feeling not just safe, but with purpose, with a place in the world. It was around this time that I met Josiah. He was a customer at the tobacco shop, always came to buy pipe tobacco on Thursdays. A quiet man with round glasses and hair already graying at the temples, despite not being that old. He must have been about 35 at the time. At first, I barely noticed his looks, his small gestures. After everything I had lived through, I had built a high wall around my heart. Men were potential threats, not potential partners. But Josiah was different. He never tried to touch me, never made inappropriate comments, never looked at me like Jeremy and his friends had looked, like an object to be used and discarded. He talked to me about books. He was an accountant and liked literature. Asked my opinion about the tobacco he bought. Treated me like a person, not like a girl alone and vulnerable. It was Mr. Adalbert who alerted me to his intentions. "That accountant is interested in you, girl," he said one day, after Josiah had left the store. "He's a decent man. You should give him a chance." The idea scared me. After what I had lived through with my mother and Jeremy, the simple idea of intimacy with a man gave me chills. But there was also a small part of me, a part that still dreamed of something like normalcy, that wondered what it would be like to be truly loved, respected, valued. It took me weeks to create courage, but finally, on a Thursday like any other, when Josiah came to buy his tobacco, I accepted his invitation to have coffee after work. We went to a simple cafeteria near the tobacco shop. I was so nervous I could barely hold the cup without spilling. Josiah must have noticed because he talked most of the time, giving me space, not asking too personal questions. He told me about his work as an accountant, about the small apartment where he lived alone since his mother had died, about the mutt dog he had adopted from the street. He spoke with a tranquility that gradually calmed me, making me lower a little the guards I always kept up. When we said goodbye, he just held my hand for a moment, a light and respectful touch. "I really enjoyed talking to you, Jandira," he said, smiling in that discreet way of his. "We can do it again next week if you want." I wanted to, and the following week too, and the next. Gradually, our meetings became part of my routine, always in public places, always ending with that gentle touch on the hand, never more than that. Josiah seemed to understand, without me needing to explain, that I needed time, space, patience. It was almost a year after our first coffee that I allowed him to kiss me. We were walking through the square where we used to meet, the golden late afternoon sun among the trees. He suddenly stopped, looked at me with those eyes that no longer scared me, and asked, almost in a whisper, "Can I kiss you, Jandira?" Nobody had ever asked me for permission before. Nobody had cared about what I wanted, what I felt. This simple act of asking, of waiting for my answer, of giving me choice, meant more to me than any declaration of love could have meant. I nodded, my heart beating so hard I thought he could hear it. His kiss was gentle, almost shy, so different from the violence I had known that I almost cried right there. Our relationship advanced slowly, at the pace I needed. Josiah never pressured me for anything, never demanded explanations about my nebulous past, about my obviously fake documents, about my occasional nightmares that made me wake up screaming. One day, almost 2 years after we met, I created courage to tell part of my story to him. Not everything. I never told anyone about Jeremy, about the photos, about what my mother forced me to do. But I told him about her alcoholism, about my father's abandonment, about how I ran away from home as a teenager. We were sitting in the small living room of his apartment, the mutt dog lying at our feet. I spoke looking at my hands, unable to face him, fearing to see disgust, rejection, maybe even nausea in his eyes. When I finished, I finally created courage to look up. What I saw in Josiah's eyes wasn't pity, nor repulsion. It was understanding, respect, and something else, something I took time to recognize as true love. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Jandira," he said simply. And then he hugged me, a gentle hug that said more than 1,000 words could say. That night, for the first time, I allowed a man to touch me by my own will. It was scary and liberating at the same time. Like I was finally reclaiming my own body, healing old wounds, discovering that intimacy could be something beautiful, not violent. Josiah asked me to marry him 6 months later. It was a simple proposal, without grand gestures. He knew me well enough to know I didn't like calling attention, being in the spotlight. He just gave me a modest ring, said he loved me, and wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. I accepted, with tears in my eyes that, for the first time in a long time, were of pure joy, not pain or fear. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just Mr. Adalbert and some close friends as witnesses. I was 19 for real, 21 in the fake documents. Josiah was 40, an age difference some people commented on, but that never mattered to us. He had the kindness and patience I needed. I had the strength and determination he admired. Our first home together was a small apartment not far from the tobacco shop. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, clean, organized, safe. For the first time since I ran away from Elizabethtown, I had a place to call home that wasn't borrowed, temporary, conditional. Life as Josiah's wife was peaceful, stable. He went to the accounting office in the morning, I to the tobacco shop. We met at night to have dinner together, talk about the day, simply be in each other's presence. On weekends, sometimes we went to the movies or just stayed home reading, listening to the radio, enjoying the peace we both valued so much. I continued working at the tobacco shop, now no longer as an employee, but as Mr. Adalbert's official partner. He was getting older and older, his hands shakier, his vision weaker. Gradually, I took on almost all the business responsibilities, while he was content to sit behind the counter, talking to old customers. "You saved this place, Jandira," he told me once, looking around the tobacco shop that, under my care, had been renovated, expanded, modernized, and, in a way, you saved me too. "You saved me, Mr. Adalbert," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing." He just smiled, in that discreet way of his, and changed the subject. He was never a man to express feelings openly. In 1970, about 5 years after my arrival in Louisville, Mr. B. Adalbert passed away peacefully in his sleep. Despite being prepared for this loss, he had been declining for months, his heart getting weaker. The pain was deep. I lost not just a partner, a mentor, but the man who had been more of a father to me than my own father ever was. The man who gave me a second chance in life when I needed it most, who trusted me when he had no reason to trust, who taught me not just about business, but about dignity, about quiet kindness, about building a life worth living. The funeral was simple, as he would have wanted. The tobacco shop stayed closed for 3 days in respect to his memory. When I reopened the doors, now as the sole owner, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Not just to keep the business running, but to honor his legacy, to continue the work he had started. The years that followed were of slow but steady growth. The tobacco shop prospered under my care, even with the economic difficulties the country faced in the 1970s and 1980s. We expanded to related products, imported pipes, fine cigars, smoking accessories. I hired employees, trained them personally, demanding the same standard of excellence Mr. Adalbert had taught me. With Josiah, I built a stable, safe, even happy life within what's possible for someone carrying as many scars as I was. We never had children. Doctors never found an explanation for my infertility. but they suspected that the physical and emotional trauma of my adolescence had affected my ability to conceive. At first, the absence of children saddened me. I dreamed of building the family I never had, of being the mother my own mother never was. But over time, I accepted that maybe it was better that way. The cycle of abuse that began with my mother would end with me, and we had a full life, even without children, our work, our friends, each other. In 1975, we bought a small but comfortable house near the tobacco shop. It was a huge achievement for me. A girl who ran away from home with just the clothes on her back was now the owner of a prosperous business and her own house. Sometimes, lying in bed next to Josiah, looking at our bedroom ceiling, I wondered if all of that was real or just a dream I would wake up from at any moment, back to the hell my childhood had been. Years went by, and I never heard directly from Elizabethtown again, from my mother, from Jeremy. It was like that part of my life had been sealed in a separate compartment, a door I rarely dared to open. Josiah respected this silence, never insisting on knowing parts of my story I wasn't ready to share. Until, in 1985, almost 20 years after my escape, I received a letter addressed to the tobacco shop. It had no return address, just the postal stamp from Elizabethtown. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside, there was only a newspaper clipping yellowed by time. It was an obituary from 1966. Yesterday passed away at her residence, Dorothy Alves Meadows, 42 years old, victim of health complications. She leaves a daughter, Jandira, whereabouts unknown, health complications. A polite way of saying she never fully recovered from the lie attack. My mother had died just 1 year after my escape. The news hit me in a way I didn't expect. I didn't feel joy, nor relief, nor even satisfaction that some kind of justice had been done. I felt only deep sadness, not for the woman who betrayed me in the worst possible way, but for the mother she could have been, for the daughter I could have been if circumstances had been different. I cried that night in Josiah's arms, who didn't ask anything, just held me while tears washed away decades of accumulated pain. I cried not just for my mother, but for myself, for the girl I was, for the lost innocence, for the years that couldn't be recovered. I never found out who sent me that clipping, how they found me after so long. Maybe some old neighbor, maybe even my father, if he was still alive. But in a way, that yellowed piece of paper brought a strange kind of closure. My mother was dead. Any chance of confrontation, of explanations, of maybe even forgiveness had disappeared with her. Life went on. The tobacco shop continued prospering, becoming an institution in downtown Louisville. Customers came not just to buy, but to talk, exchange stories, keep alive a tradition in times of rapid change. Josiah and I aged together, watching the world change around us. We saw the end of various social movements, changes in laws, economic ups and downs. Through all of it, we maintained our small island of stability. The tobacco shop, our house, our relationship based on mutual respect and silent understanding. In 2010, Josiah got sick, a cancer that started in the pancreas and quickly spread. Doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted almost a year, always fighting, not from fear of death, but, as he told me once, to have more time with you, my love. I lost my companion of almost 45 years on a rainy March afternoon. I was beside him when he passed, holding his hand, whispering thanks for everything we had lived together. It was a peaceful death, without pain thanks to medications, a dignified departure for a man who lived with dignity. The grief was deep, but it didn't destroy me. After everything I had lived through, I knew I would survive this loss too. The tobacco shop continued being my anchor, my purpose. At 63, I could have retired, sold the business, rested. But what would I do with my days? The tobacco shop wasn't just a means of living. It was my identity, my achievement, my connection to Mr. Adalbert and everything he had taught me. Years continued passing. The neighborhood changed around the tobacco shop. Old stores closed, giving way to modern franchises. Old neighbors left, new faces arrived. But Jandira's tobacco shop, renamed after Mr. Adalbert's death, remained, a piece of living history amid accelerated progress. And so I reached 76 years old, still behind the same counter where I found refuge when I was just a scared girl running from horrors no child should know. Life wasn't easy, but I survived. More than that, I built something worthwhile, an honest business, a respected reputation, memories of true love. When I look back at the path I traveled since that terrible night when I threw lie on my own mother and fled in the darkness, I don't see just pain and trauma. I also see moments of unexpected grace, Zelda finding me at the bus station, Mr. Adalbert giving me a chance, Josiah showing me that love can be gentle and respectful. Maybe that's what I learned after everything, that even in the darkest stories, there are moments of light, that even on the most difficult paths, there are hands that reach out to help us, that it's possible to survive the worst horrors and still build a life with meaning, with dignity, with moments of unexpected beauty. I never went back to Elizabethtown. I never tried to find out more about what happened to my mother after the attack, if Jeremy was arrested for his crimes, if my father still lives somewhere. Some doors are better kept closed, some ghosts are better left resting. My story isn't beautiful, isn't inspirational in the traditional sense. It's a story of survival, of doing what's necessary, even when the choices are impossible. It's a story of scars that never completely disappear, but that, with time, stop hurting with every movement. If there's a lesson in all of this, maybe it's this: that we're stronger than we imagine, that even broken, we can rebuild ourselves, that an act of kindness, like Mr. Adalbert taking me in when I had nothing, can change the course of an entire life. And maybe, just maybe, that it's possible to find peace even after hell, that it's possible to build a dignified life even starting from rubble. And so the years passed like water through fingers. Now at 76 years old, I still take care of my tobacco shop every day. Young people today don't really understand the value of this place, with their e-cigarettes and cell phones always in hand. But my old customers, those who've been coming here for decades, know that this place is more than a store. It's a piece of Louisville's history, a little corner where time seems to run slower. After Josiah passed away, the tobacco shop became even more important to me. It's not just a business, it's my legacy, my story of overcoming. Each shelf, each drawer, each old pipe in the window holds a piece of my journey. From the scared girl who ran away from home to the white-haired lady speaking to you today. I never found out what happened to Jeremy after that terrible day. Sometimes I wonder if he continued hurting other girls, if someone managed to stop him. I want to believe that yes, that somehow justice reached him, even if late. About my father, I learned from a customer from Elizabethtown that he died in 1998, in Louisville. He lived until the end with that other woman, had 2 more children with her. He never tried to find me, at least that I know of. Maybe it was better that way. What would we say to each other after so much time? What forgiveness could I offer to a man who abandoned us when we needed him most? The scars from the past never completely disappear. I still have nightmares sometimes. I dream about my mother, about Jeremy, about that room where I lost my innocence. I wake up in cold sweat, heart racing, needing a few seconds to remember where I am, that I'm safe, that time is behind me. But I learned that scars can also be marks of strength. Each one of them reminds me that I survived, that I found a path through the darkness, that I built a life worth living, despite everything. If I could go back in time and talk to that 14-year-old girl, scared and desperate, what would I say? Maybe just this: it's going to hurt, my daughter. It's going to hurt a lot, but you're strong, stronger than you imagine. And one day, that pain that feels like it's going to kill you will transform into a strength that nobody can take away from you. My story isn't beautiful, isn't inspirational in the traditional sense. It's a story of survival, of doing what's necessary when choices are impossible. But if it can help someone going through something similar, it will have been worth telling. If you made it this far, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to listen to stories like mine. I know they're heavy, painful. But you stayed, you listened, and that means a lot to this old lady who has seen so much in life. You gave me the gift of your attention, and I'm very grateful for that. If you liked my story, leave your like down below and subscribe. And if you really watched until the end, it makes me very happy to know that. Comment there, I watched until the end. So I know there are real people on the other side of the screen, listening to what a lady like me has to tell. Life isn't always kind, my dear ones. Sometimes it's cruel, unfair, painful. But as long as there's breath in our lungs, there's a chance to start over, to heal, to find peace. That's what I learned in my 76 years in this world. And that's what I leave with you today. Thank you for listening to me. May God bless you all.